In this unit of work, we will be looking at the cardiovascular system, and in particular the heart. Exercise that relies predominantly on the supply and use of oxygen for prolonged performance is termed endurance or aerobic work. The aerobic system, which provides energy for this prolonged work, consists of three distinct body systems, which is the heart, the vascular system, and the respiratory system. These three systems closely interact to ensure there is a consistent distribution of oxygen around the body, particularly to the muscles during exercise. All this information so far should be common knowledge from your GCSE content. An athlete's aerobic capacity is limited by the efficiency of the three aerobic systems which we mentioned here. Put simply, an athlete with low aerobic capacity will be less able to supply sufficient oxygen for their muscles during work. What we need to understand within the next few slides is the structure and function of the cardiorespiratory system. The respiratory system takes in O2 and removes CO2. And obviously this happens in the lungs. The heart receives blood from the lungs, what it does then is it acts as a double pump system, which means blood goes through the heart twice. The heart forces blood around the vascular system to the lungs and the body, which include the tissues and the muscles. The vascular system is obviously to do with the blood and the blood vessels. The blood vessels transport and direct O2 and CO2 to and from the lungs, heart and the body. This is how these three link together to ensure efficient aerobic capacity. The heart acts as a dual action pump or a double pump system, two separate pumps that work simultaneously to pump blood to two different destinations. The right side pumps deoxygenated blood towards the lungs to get oxygenated, and the left side pumps oxygenated blood towards the rest of the body. Before we look at how the heart works as a dual pump system, it is essential to have a basic knowledge of its structure. The heart is located within the thoracic cavity, underneath the ribs of the chest. It is approximately the size of a clenched fist. What we have here is the basic overview of the heart. The heart consists of two pumps, separated by a muscular wall called the septum, which we can see here. The heart also consists of two chambers. At the top, we have the atrium, and at the bottom we have the ventricles. As we know from our previous slides, the right side pumps deoxygenated blood and the left side pumps oxygenated blood. So what we have here is the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium and the left ventricle. We can also see the walls of the atriums or atria and the walls of the ventricles. The left and right atria are the low pressure chambers that principally collect and store blood before pumping it below to the two ventricles. The muscular walls of the atria are relatively thin compared to the ventricle walls because the atria only have to pump blood directly below to the ventricles, as we can see here. The left and right ventricles are the high pressure chambers that generate the force or pressure required to pump blood around the whole body. The greater the force generated requires a greater contraction. Therefore, the muscular walls of the ventricles are thicker than the atrial walls. The right ventricle wall is thinner than the left ventricle wall, and this is because the right ventricle only pumps blood to the lungs, whereas the left ventricle pumps blood around the whole body, so the left ventricle has a thicker muscular wall than the right. There are 4 one-way valves situated within the heart, and their functions are to control the forward direction of blood flow through the heart, and also to prevent the backflow of blood within the chambers. In the heart, we have 2 atrioventricular valves. Because we have a right and a left side, they're named slightly different. So, on the right side, the atrioventricular or AV valve is called the tricuspid valve. And we can see that that is located here. On the left-hand side, the AV or atrioventricular valve is called the bicuspid valve. And that is located just here. The 2 remaining valves you can see are called semilunar valves, or SL valves. The right semilunar valve is called the pulmonary valve, which is located just here. The pulmonary valve exits the right ventricle into this tube here, which is called the pulmonary artery. The left semilunar valve is called the aortic valve, which is located just here. The aortic valve exits the left ventricle into this tube up here, which is called the aorta. As we know, the heart interacts with the blood vessels of the vascular system to transport blood to and from the heart. We need to know which blood vessels transport blood to and from the internal structures of the heart. We've already looked at the aorta, the pulmonary artery, but we're going to go into more detail now. What we have is known as the superior and the inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava is this over here, and the inferior vena cava is situated down here. They carry deoxygenated blood from the body to the right atrium. The superior vena cava carries deoxygenated blood from anywhere in the body above the heart. The inferior vena cava carries deoxygenated blood from the body anywhere below the heart to the right atrium. The pulmonary artery, which we have here, carries deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs. So deoxygenated blood will be in here. It will go through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery, and then that will go up to the lungs. And obviously that is where it will get oxygenated from. The pulmonary vein, which is these four here. Okay, so we have the pulmonary vein, which are the four coming over at the back of the heart. Their job is to carry oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So blood from the lungs has come into the left atrium via the pulmonary vein. We then have the one we spoke about earlier, which is this one here, which is the aorta. And the aorta carries oxygenated blood from the left ventricle here to the whole entire body. So oxygenated blood comes from the lungs via the pulmonary vein. It goes into the left atrium. It goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. It goes through the aortic valve into the aorta and then goes to the body. Hopefully this picture will give you a better understanding of how the blood moves through the heart twice, because it's a double pump system, to the muscles, to the body and to the lungs. So we have our left and right side. Left side is oxygenated, right side is deoxygenated. We have the main important one, which is the aorta, which is carrying oxygenated blood to the whole entire body. Once it gets to where it needs to go, whether the head or arms, the internal organs or the legs, that oxygen gets used up and gets transferred into carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide travels through the blood vessels back into the heart via the inferior vena cava or the superior vena cava. That would then go into the right atrium. It would then go from the right atrium through this valve here, which is the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it will then get pushed out of the heart via the semilunar valve or the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries. Okay, that deoxygenated blood will go into the left or right lung to get oxygenated. So carbon dioxide will get expelled, oxygen will be brought in, and gaseous exchange will happen. The blood is then taken back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, which we know we have 4 of. They then go into the left atrium. They then go through this valve here, which is the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it gets pushed through this valve here, which is the aortic valve, back into the aorta to go to the head or arms, the internal organs, or to the legs. And it happens all over again. For our next lesson, we will be looking at the heart's conduction system and linking it to the cardiac cycle. But for that to work, we need to have an understanding, a detailed understanding of the structure of the heart and how blood is transported from the lungs to the body, both O2 and CO2, oxygenated and deoxygenated. Have fun!